If you recognize that, you know that today we are talking about the hit TV show Brooklyn Nine-Nine. Let's go. Welcome to Pop Culture Catechism, conversations about music, movies, and the longings of the human heart. Let's get started. Who would you say is your best friend? And what makes them your best friend? What is it about your friendship that just makes you come alive, that makes you connect with them? Have you ever wondered, am I going to screw up my kids? Would I be a good parent? Am I a good parent? Why are there some people in our lives that we just want their approval so badly? And is that a bad thing all the time? We're going to cover all this and more as we dive into the characters and the laughs and the craziness and the zaniness of the hit show Brooklyn Nine-Nine. I am super excited today because we have to walk with us through this journey Katie Prejean McGrady, who's a radio host, an author, a speaker. She's awesome. You're going to love her. My name is Mike Tenney. I'm the host of Pop Culture Catechism. I am a Catholic speaker and worship leader. I spent over a decade in Catholic high school theology teaching, and also trying to make it as a rock star when I wasn't doing that. And I love having deep conversations with people, and I love music. I love movies. I love shows. I love pop culture. So that's what we're going to do today. And I know you're going to love what we have for you today. But before we get into it, I need to tell you about popculturecatechism.com, where you can become a patron of this show, just like our patrons right now. Thank you to all our patrons, especially Lisa and Bob Tenney, Stephen, Maggie Hubbard, Jacqueline and Ryan Olivet, Carl and Melissa Gore, Tom and Emily Camberiotti, and Rob Smith. They and all our patrons get access to exclusive content. Like on today's episode, every episode has exclusive content, but today we're talking about Brooklyn Nine-Nine, and at the time we recorded this, the last season hadn't come out. So today we're going to talk about the last season, and I have as a special guest my lovely wife, Maddie. Say hi, Maddie.
Hi.
So she's not the sort of person that is normally on podcasts and in front of people, but because she loves me, she's agreed to do this. So if you're a patron, after the show, go to the AWAKEN app, go to the Pop Culture Catechism community, and you'll have access to our thoughts on the final season. Speaking of the AWAKEN app, if you go to theawakenapp.io, it's a free app for everyone with a Christian music library and a prayer library. It's an awesome place for Catholics and Christians to have community, where we try to avoid a lot of the toxicity that's rampant on a lot of other social media platforms that we won't name, but it's a great and growing community. We're over 1,000 members now, so download theawakenapp.io. And then, of course, if you're a patron, you get lots of exclusive content with talks by me and other show hosts, and pick one of the 6 tiers of giving at popculturecatechism.com, and you get lots of perks and access to that community, including our conversation after that. One more thing, just to let you know that this conversation with Katie got cut a little bit short, so it's a little shorter than some of our other episodes that we have, but it's still a great conversation. After this episode recorded, I actually got to meet Katie this summer. We were doing a conference together. She was the speaker, I was the worship leader, and she's just as lovely in person as she is on this episode. I really think you're going to like what she has to say, so enjoy the episode. Without any further ado, let's talk about Brooklyn Nine-Nine, but I want to bring Katie up. Where's Katie? Where is she? Here she is. Hi, Katie.
Hey, thanks for having me.
My pleasure. I've been following you for a long time. I'm a big fan of what you do.
Thanks.
And you do so much. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you have going on?
Yeah. So professionally by day, I'm a radio host. I have a daily show on the Catholic channel on Sirius XM 129. And I also work with Ave Maria Press and produce a couple of podcasts with those guys, Ave Explorers and Ave Spotlight. And I'm a mom and I'm a wife. I've got 2 kids, 3.5 and 6 months old. My husband is a biology teacher and science department head. And we make our home in Lake Charles, Louisiana. Every now and then I hop on a plane. I mean, in pre-COVID times, that's what I did all the time.
Uh-huh.
And now in the post-COVID / still COVID, I don't even know what we call it now.
I know.
Flights are not high on my list of priorities, and I kind of love the fact that I don't have to do that anymore. So, so yeah, and I'm a big fan of the Brooklyn Nine-Nine universe.
Nice. Me too. And you've written a couple books too, right?
I have. Oh yeah, I guess I should always talk about the books. Yeah, I've written 2 books through Ave Maria Press, like full-length books. So Follow Your Lifelong Adventure with Jesus and Room 24, Adventures of a New Evangelist. I was a classroom teacher as well, so that one's about that. And then my husband and I have written 2 short prayer books for teens to walk them through Lent and Advent. And we're working on an Easter one now.
Oh, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. And I've listened to a bunch of your podcasts on the Ave Explorers. You've done a bunch of cool stuff with that as well. So you,
yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I just a big fan, really appreciate
Thanks.
your voice. And I just, when I hear you speak, a few things always come through is like, you really love the people that you're speaking to. And that is always just evident to me. And you're trying to reach people who are hurting, and you're trying to reach people who may not always feel heard in the church. And I love that you're just open to dialoguing with people and not afraid to talk about controversial things, and just do it in a way with a spirit of love, a pastoral spirit that's faithful to the church. And it's very clear to me that you love the church, you love your Catholic faith, and you love Jesus. So just
Thanks.
Thank you for what you do. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome. So if you don't know Brooklyn Nine-Nine, you should watch it, because this show is hilarious. I think my wife and I, we watch some like The Office, Parks and Rec. Those are all good shows, and this is right up there in terms of, I think, in terms of like, we laugh out loud at this show, maybe even more than Parks and Rec and The Office. It's just so funny. It's been around. It started on Fox back in 2013. And it's now been on 6 seasons. Then Fox dropped it, got picked up by NBC, and I think they have one more season coming out in 2021-22. It's going to be the final season on NBC, but it's won tons of Emmys. A bunch of the actors have won Emmys, and it's won all sorts of awards. Super funny. Brooklyn Nine-Nine. Katie, what do you love about this show?
Oh gosh. So I knew that we were doing this, and so I've been doing a rewatch.
Nice.
And so there's another show that I wanted to throw into your list of like The Office, Parks and Rec, Brooklyn Nine-Nine, like this Mike Schur, The Good Place is another one that kind of exists in this universe. Superstore. It just ended this past week, which is a Justin Spitzer show, and he was an Office writer. So they all kind of, I feel like they're workplace comedies, right? And so I love how Brooklyn Nine-Nine brings me into a workplace that I have zero experience with. Like, I've worked in retail, I've worked in a boring office job. I've never worked in government, but I did volunteer one summer at the local mayor's office. So I kind of feel like I can relate to Parks and Rec a little bit. But Brooklyn Nine-Nine brings us into this universe of cop life, which is, in this particular moment in our American history, I think is definitely something that we need to talk about and examine how that could be better.
For sure.
But even more than that, I think it shows in a real way, it shows the flaws of people in an exaggerated way that makes it kind of amusing. Yeah. And I love that, but then it also shows the goodness of humanity and like this real desire to protect and to serve. I mean, that's part of the oath of a cop, so to speak. But even like the protecting of one another in the precinct and the community aspects just really, I mean, that's the deeper level of the show. It's also just patently hysterical, like the quick cuts and the lack of a laugh track. It's the only kind of TV shows I like to watch. I think it's pithy. I really love some of the recurring things that they do, like the Halloween heist is always one of my favorite series of episodes. The fact that, like Amy can't cook, but yet she always wants to host Thanksgiving, like stuff like that. I just love it. I mean, I love it so much that a couple years ago, my husband gave me an autographed pilot script because I'm kind of so like not only do I like shows,
hold that up again.
So the pilot episode, I should hold it up to the screen. Yeah, it's autographed by all the actors. It's like just a copy. It's not the original script.
That's still super
it's just
cool.
a copy of the script. It's still pretty cool. Yeah, because I'm the kind of person, like, if I like something, like, I want stuff from it. So I have like office paraphernalia that's been autographed. I have a Dundee sitting on my desk.
Oh, cool.
I have a little Sebastian poster on another side of the office. And so now I also have, I couldn't find it before we started recording, but I have a mug that says, amazing detective / genius.
Oh, that's great. That's great.
I normally drink my coffee out of. So yeah, so I'm invested in the universe of the show.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, I love something they do really well that I'm not sure I've ever seen done on a show is each season they have these recurring bits that come back, like the Halloween heist. And they have these recurring characters like Wunsch, who's like the captain's arch nemesis. Doug Judy is my favorite. I love Doug Judy, the Pontiac Bandit. Like his episodes.
Formerly Daryl Philbin.
Yeah, from The Office. Like they have the guy the vulture who steals their cases, Pimento. Oh my gosh, that guy. Yeah. So just these things that come back and just you forget about them and then they come back. It's so funny. And Andy Samburg, I've been a fan of him for a long time, and I love that. I feel like this show really gave him a place to shine. He was on SNL for a while. He did stuff at the Lonely Island, and I feel like he really kind of grew up a lot on this show. Like he used to have a lot of crass humor and which isn't necessarily always bad or inappropriate, I think. But I feel like he's gotten to a more mature place, but he's still just as zany. I think he's great on this show. And so many of the actors are just so hilarious. So
yeah. I also love it's such a diverse cast.
Yeah, it really is.
You know, like there's it feels like every ethnicity is represented in some capacity. And really, like, not only is that nice to see on television, because, you know, we know that at any workplace, but even in the police precincts, there's going to be diverse individuals in there. But I love that there is that representation that's there. And it's not like a weird, not that diversity or representation would be a weird thing, but sometimes shows, like, they'll make an effort of like, okay, well, we're bringing in somebody of a different color, or we're bringing in, you know, this particular recurrent, and this is just like, no, it's just part of the cast. It's just part of the show.
It's
like,
not
this
tokenism.
Is not weird.
Yeah.
It's not tokenism. That's the way to put it. Yeah.
So the high school I worked at is majority African-American. And I think a lot of times as a white guy, I don't realize how important representation is. I think it's easy for me to look over it, but, you know, the way that my students like reacted to Black Panther and Wakanda when that became like the movie, and you know, when Beyonce puts out a song called Brown Skin Girl, like, you know, talking about how beautiful brown skin is, and like that wouldn't have ever occurred to me that that's a big deal, but that's a big deal for them if you grew up not seeing many actors, or the actors you saw that looked like you were always a stereotype, or, you know, all you've ever heard about is mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of them all. And that's synonymous with beautiful. Like, I think it's easy for us to overlook how important representation can be. So anyway, I'm glad you brought that up.
Well, yeah. And it's, I think especially interesting in this show and good in this show that the bosses are Black men, and they actually address it in the show when Terry gets stopped by the white cop and goes all the way to reporting it because he knows that it's an issue, when Holt is looking for advancement and he kind of seems to like keep getting pushed to the side and finally acknowledges that it's because he's being marginalized because of his skin and because of his sexuality. So the show is and similar in the vein, I think, of just comedies these days. I saw this a ton with Superstore too. Not that that's what this episode's about, but it used to be, I felt like in the sitcom world, slap happy, they're silly shows, and now it's like comedies can actually address some things that are going on in the culture in a way that almost kind of like it de-escalates the tension and lets us not laugh about it, but maybe think about something in a more lighthearted way that then actually gets us to a place where we can have a deeper conversation. Brooklyn Nine-Nine, I think, does that. Yeah,
and I mean, I think that's similar to what Jesus did with parables, right? He would take things that people were all uptight about and be like, well, think about it like this farmer in the field. Think about it like, you know, a father and his son. Think about it like this, you know, a woman kneading the dough in the bread and in the yeast. And when you talk about it that way, or, you know, a man went down from Jericho to Jerusalem, and when you put it in a story, then it allows us to kind of get ourselves out of it in a way, you know? So I feel like that's I agree with you. I think the show does that well. So I would just want to kind of talk character by character, and we can talk about their friendships. That's another thing I love, is I love the friendships on this show, especially Jake's friendship. Can we start by, can we throw up the picture of the characters that we got there? Production crew, thank you. So we got Jake Peralta, Andy Samburg, who is he's probably the most famous person on the show. He was of Saturday Night Live fame, and he's kind of the main character. And he is. It's interesting because he's this interesting mix of like totally like a screw up and like really good at his job at the same time. He's like this little kid who can't take anything seriously, but also like a super good detective who has a heart of gold and cares so much for the people he's taking care of and the people that he works with. So what do you see, like, as I was thinking about like, what lens do we want to look at this through? And I know you've done a lot of youth ministry and campus ministry and worked in Catholic schools, and so have I. And I was kind of thinking of it as, okay, let's imagine these characters are almost like youth in our youth group or young adults in our young adult group.
That's a good way of putting it.
What do we see in them that we're like, this is God's giftedness in you, and I want to affirm you in this, and I want to lift you up in this, and then these are the ways which me as a youth minister, the teacher, in thinking, this is how I'm hoping to help this person grow. So
that's a good way of putting it.
Let's say you and I are sitting in the teacher's lounge of our Catholic school and we're teachers and we're like, tell me, Jake Peralta, how's he doing? How can we?
Yeah, it's a good way of kind of going through a show.
Mhm.
One of the other beautiful things about this show is that characters are learning and they're growing. And so like Jake, from the get-go, you just kind of, you write him off like, oh, he's a screw up.
Yeah.
One of the opening scenes of the show is that like he's talking about Holt and he's kind of poking fun at all these rules that Holt has imposed. But you actually see this incredible growth over the course of the seasons of him owning the fact that he is a good detective. I think Jake is deeply insecure.
Yeah.
Right.
Sure.
Because he doesn't have a father figure in his life. And then even when his father comes back, he's got this huge trust issue because there's been this hole of a father in his life affirming him and encouraging him. He had to be his own dad, which is why I think he also kind of pushes back on Holt because he's never had anybody. So he's never had anybody to tell him like, no, you do need to show up on time. You do need to put on a tie. Like, again, that's just the first episode, but all these other things that start to happen. So I find like Jake's insecurity actually then kind of becomes a strength because he starts to acknowledge that insecurity, starts to acknowledge that, wait a second, like I am good at my job. I do know what I'm doing. I don't need to be a jerk about it.
Yeah.
And I need to recognize that the people around me actually really love me and support me, and I don't need to kind of hold them at arm's length. So we see this a ton with his relationship with Amy at first. He's the little middle school boy who yanks on pigtails, right?
Yeah,
and like
exactly.
is just poking fun at her. But in reality, like he actually really respects her and he really likes her and probably has liked her from the get-go.
Yeah.
And so when he owns that relationship, I feel like all these other things fall into place. I forgot how quickly they got together in the show. Like they're definitely a faster, they pair up in like the middle of season 2, I think they finally get together. And so by the last, the final episode of the last season that we've had, and then I assume this next season, I think they're going to do a jump. I think they're going to jump into the future similar to how they did with Parks and Rec. I hope so, at least.
Okay.
Because I really want to see Amy and Jake parent.
Yeah.
And I don't want it to just be the parenting of a newborn. Like I really want to see them parenting. Sorry, I'm kind of jumping around, but his relationship with Amy, the two of them are what you would think exact opposites, but I think she also carries a lot of insecurity.
For sure.
And that she wants affirmation. She wants everybody to know she's the smartest person in the room. She's a daughter among brothers who were all high achieving.
Yep.
The Lin-Manuel Miranda, the fact that he's her brother and they bring him onto the show.
I forgot about that.
And he was like a diehard fan of the show. And it's one of the reasons the show got picked up by NBC. I just absolutely love that about
I didn't know all that backstory. That's cool.
Yeah. Like when they started their tweet campaign to get the show back on the air, he was tweeting out like, please don't take this show from me. It's one of like 3 things that I watch. And so then they give him a chance. Sean Astin too, who plays Samwise Gamgee. Sean Astin is a huge fan. And so they got him on the show as well. So I love that about the way that the creators of the show, Dan Gore and Mike Schur, have really brought that in. But Amy and Jake's insecurities complement one another, right?
Yeah.
Jake, he needs people in his life to tell him that he's good at it. And Amy does that. Amy needs in her life people to know that she's competent and that she actually is probably the best in the room.
Yeah.
And so together, I think they're able to be that affirming presence to one another. Now, of course, it's sitcoms. So we only see like surface level things. But I do think the show, I'm thinking of this one episode where it's their Me Too episode. It's in one of the more recent seasons where Amy is really struggling with the fact that like she feels like she's not being advanced in her career because she's a woman. And Jake does exactly what I would want my husband to do if I was feeling that way, or a friend or a male coworker. Like he just lets her talk. Like he listens and then he apologizes and says, I'm so sorry that this is what you're going through. And he doesn't immediately try to fix it. And I love that their relationship, they help each other vent and they help each other process and they help each other fix it. But like there's just a very human element to that. Like you can tell they were coworkers who became friends who fell in love. And I love that about the two of them together.
Yeah. One, I find when I was younger, before I was married, and I thought about what it might be like to be married someday, I think about the romance and the sexy stuff and all the warm, fuzzy feelings and all that sort of stuff. But I think what has most profoundly changed me and what has been, and I wouldn't say a surprise, but maybe it is a surprise. The most pleasant surprise of our marriage is just like the strength of our friendship. Me and my wife, Maddie, like we really, really like each other and we just really get along. we like being together, and like our friendship is what's carried us through, even when we've gone through some pretty tough stuff, is just that baseline respect that we have for one another. Even if we're feeling, one of us is feeling a little neglected, like we always know that the other person at rock bottom respects us and cherishes us, even if we're not always feeling that right now. Like there is this base level friendship. And I think that's so important. I definitely see that in Jake and Amy. I think you're right that they both want that approval, and they see it in Holt. Holt is definitely like a father figure for them. And it's interesting because he is so cold and like stoic and stony. You know what I mean? At least initially, I think they make him a little crazier in later seasons, but
yeah, he gets zany.
Yeah. It's interesting the way that both Jake and Amy just, they crave his approval. Like Jake calls him dad all the time.
Right. And Amy thinks that he is destined to be her mentor. And I love that part of the, where they have to go through, like he's been mentoring her and she knows he's been mentoring her, but then he sits down and he's like, we have to go through this entire binder in a week because we're running out of time together. And there's kind of this beautiful affirmation of like, he really does see himself in her, and she longs to be. I mean, Amy's advancement of her career, she turns into a sergeant. Like the fact that she's the one that gets promoted in the marriage, I love.
Yeah,
that's the female girl power in me kind of thing. But also the Holt figure in the whole precinct. There's so many different times where Holt gets torn away. So when he gets put at the PR, and then when he has to go into witness protection, and like he's not present with the whole group, and you realize very quickly how much they depend upon his leadership and his guidance and his insight, but then how much they long to help him and make sure that he knows that he is valued. I really do feel like as we're talking about this, like the crux of the show is everybody in the precinct's love language is words of affirmation. Like everybody in the precinct needs to be told, hey, you're doing a good job and we love you and we support you and we want to be with you. And I actually think that the show does that with all of these different characters, which is a very human thing, almost a very Christian thing, is that like we want to build people up.
Yeah.
And Holt's kind of he's the glue of that department.
Yeah. It makes me think of Ephesians 4:29 is like, let nothing filthy or unclean come out of your mouth, but only that which is like good for the edification of one another. That idea of edifying other people with your words, of affirming people with your words, like all through the Proverbs of the Old Testament is like the power of the tongue to build up or destroy, or even Jesus talks about, you've heard you shall not kill. But I say anyone who says raka to one another will be liable to judgment. Like the power our words have to wound or to heal and affirm and lift people up is so powerful and evident. I'm definitely a words of affirmation person. Like I love it when people tell me how great I am and what a good job I'm doing. When I'm doing a talk, I mean, you've done a lot more than I have, so maybe you're over this, but after I do the talk, it's like, I want somebody to come up and say, hey, you did a great job at that talk. Or you did a great job at that holy hour.
Yeah. We need that as human beings. We thrive on somebody just looking at us and saying like, not so much you've got it together, but like I see what you're doing and I appreciate what you're doing. And I think the characters in this show, they do that for one another really well.
Yeah, it's kind of like affirming a fundamental goodness, Like I think maybe that's a question all of us have to wrestle with, is like, am I good? Am I lovable? Am I worthy? And it's, I mean, we can get that in kind of a small s sacramental way through one another. Like we can be that voice to one another in our lives. But I think deep down, no matter how great people tell me I am, no matter how much praise I get, like until I find it in my relationship with the Lord, like that's always going to be empty at some point. Like I'm just going to seek more praise, right? There I'm going to want more affirmation. Oh, I got this many followers. Now I want more followers. I got this many people telling me how great I am. Now I want them to say even more. And the only thing that can fill that like well of loss within us, of brokenness within us, is the love of God the Father. But that often can be filtered through the love that we see of people around us, like Holt, that approval of Holt and how he really does build them up. And I think he teaches them to go past kind of the words of affirmation, to not just reflect, because he's kind of stingy a little bit with his words of affirmation. And he shows them love by calling them to be more in a lot of ways, challenging them. And I think maybe that's something we all need. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, he's a good dad. He doesn't just placate them.
Yeah.
He doesn't just give in.
Yeah.
He's not the doting papa, right? Like he's the firm father. And I think we all need that in our lives.
Yeah. I think so too. I definitely do. Speaking of the doting papa,
yeah.
who are we talking about next? Of course, Terry, who's definitely, I relate so much to Terry being like a father of two young kids and like trying to do the career thing and trying to be a good dad at home. And just so many things he struggled with. And he's like out looking for the blankie or the
moo-moo.
Moo-moo. Yeah. Like I've been places, I'm like, we can't find blankie. What are we going to do if we can't find blankie? I'm sure you can relate.
Yeah. We have extra Charlie's the chicken or Charlie the chickens in the closet just in case. She'll know the difference, but we do have it there.
You're sneaky.
Just in case.
You're sneaky.
Well, so my friend's little boy lost he called him Duckins, and Duck got lost, and it was a tragedy. Yeah, I love Terry in that, like, he is. I said Holt's the glue of the precinct. Actually, it's Terry, because like Terry's constant. Like Terry is always there. He's always working hard. Like even on the days when he like tries to take off to be with his kids, like somehow the characters are there around him. And I love that Terry's at the end of the day, like the heart of Terry is very much like trying to call to task, like to keep people focused, to keep people committed to the work that they're doing. But then also like, so I'm thinking of the episode where Jake gets injured. And he's like, no, I got to finish working the case. And Terry's like, no, you have to go home and get better.
Yeah.
And like he sees inside of each one of his detectives, like what they bring to the precinct and their goodness and their value, and tries to affirm that in them, but then also like wants them to, stay committed to the work that they're doing. And then on top of that has these girls, and like you can see the love that he has as a dad of two. I mean, he's a total girl dad.
Total girl dad, yeah.
When he writes the comic book for them to like teach them all the different, virtues would be the word, like how to stand up for themselves.
Remind me of this. I'm drawing a blank on this.
So he, it's like a subplot in an episode, and like this, I think it's in the 3rd season. But basically, like he's riffing on characters in the precinct for this little, because he loves to do art, and that's the other thing about Terry Jeffords. He's the secret artist that like has this sensitive side.
Yeah, even though he's enormous and huge.
Yeah, he's huge, right? Like show muscles, as he likes to say. But he does this little comic book, and Gina and Amy are like, wait a second, well, this doesn't make any sense. And at the end of it, he's just like, I'm just trying to teach my girls like how to be good people. And that's like, isn't that what every dad is trying to do? Every parent, really. So yeah, I love me some Terry.
That makes me think of, so my one of my mentors in ministry is a guy named Tom Brinkman, who I worked with the Capuchins up in New York. And he said one of the fundamental principles that he uses for working with youth and evangelization and catechesis is, he says, I want my youth, and he was talking about his children, but also like the youth he works with. He's like, I want to expose them to interesting, faith-filled people. Just people who are being themselves. They're not conforming to this, that, or the other thing. They are alive with who God has made them to be. And it's like that Saint Catherine Siena quote, be who you're called to be and you'll set the world on fire. And, I see him doing that. Like he wants his daughters to be exposed to these different people in the precinct that he looks up to, because they're going to soak stuff up from that. And that's what I want for my kids. I want them to be around their aunts and uncles and my friends from church and other people that I admire. And I want to be like, cause I know they're going to soak that up. Those other kind of role models in their life. So I think that's super important. I mean, that's why we have godparents and confirmation sponsors and
When I love how Terry makes Jake the godfather of their 3rd little girl, the surprise baby.
Yeah.
And there's this subplot there of like Terry doesn't want to get a vasectomy because he doesn't think that he's done having babies, kind of thing. And I love how he kind of pushes that envelope or pushes that narrative of like, wait a second, like dads can want more kids too.
Yeah.
Like it's not a one-sided thing. And Jake supports him in that. Jake encourages him that. Jake finds out that they're pregnant with the 3rd before anybody else does and can't really hold in the secret. So yeah, I love Jake and Terry's relationship a ton.
Yeah, and I love they have a really cool friendship, and I love that this show is like kind of pro baby in a lot of ways. Cause I feel
It
like
is.
so much of our culture, especially in the media, it's like, oh, when you having kids, it's like, oh, I'm not having, cause there's kind of this knee jerk reaction in so much of the world. I remember when my wife was pregnant, we went to a wedding for one of my college friends, and she hadn't met a bunch of my college friends. She's a few years younger than me. And so some of the ladies I went to college with who had some kids, they kind of took my wife aside at one point, and they would just be like, look, being a mom is hard, but it's amazing. And they just kind of like, even though they just met her for the first time, just because of their friendship with me, they kind of took her aside and like affirmed her and like built her up and is like, you're going to love it and it's going to be amazing. And I think that was so good for us to hear, just because we don't even realize how many anti-children messages there are out there. So I love that this show kind of bucked that a little bit. It's, they're excited about kids. And so we're Jake and Amy.
Terry's got kids. Charles adopts.
Yeah.
And then Amy and Jake struggle with infertility, which is like the way that they talk about that in the show, honestly, was probably one of, I think, the best, like there's a conversation at one point where like Amy's like, everybody tells me to stop stressing about it, but like that's not going to help. Like maybe there is something wrong, or like, and they're both really struggling with it. So then when they do get pregnant, like you're rejoicing for them, but like I was thinking of all my friends I know that have struggled with infertility.
Yes.
And how this show really just, it captured that struggle, and it captured, and they jump through time as they're telling that story. Yeah.
And how Jake, even before that, he had gone on a journey where he didn't want to have kids because he was worried he's going to screw his kids up because his father was so terrible and was a philanderer and was gone all the time. And he's like, I know that's in me somewhere. They say the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Like, I don't want to pass that on to my kids. I don't know what a healthy family looks like. And he finally arrives at this place where he's like, no, I am excited about this. And then it's such a struggle for them. It's like, there's some really heartbreaking moments in there. I think you're right. It really talk about, representation. Like, so many people struggle with that and they think they're the only ones, and then, I think it's probably more common in the Catholic world, for people to say, oh, NFP, you got to abstain. And, we have so many kids, these homeschoolers with 12 kids. And there's some people sitting there being like, I would love to have 12 kids. We can't even have one. We've had miscarriage after miscarriage after miscarriage, or there's sexual trauma in our relationship. So my spouse doesn't even want to have sex with me. Like, there's so many people struggling with issues like that. And they don't see other people struggling with it. So I think it's great when shows like this and people in the church are willing to talk about these things, because people are struggling with them all the time. So
it's like you said, it's representation. It's the chance to actually, show the full spectrum. It's not just, okay, well, we got another bad guy that we have to catch. Like they're really digging into some harder things over the course of just like the scaffolding of the show, which is they're cops and they're catching robbers kind of thing.
Absolutely. You brought up Charles before.
Yeah.
Good
old Charles.
I love Charles. And I have some things to say about Charles, but I'll let you go first if you have some stuff.
I think Charles is the puppy dog of the show, and that like he wants everybody, just like everybody else, he wants everybody to love him. I think Charles gets taken advantage of, and the real crux of the show is some of it is Charles learning how to stand up for himself, which is I think a message that a lot of people who do love really hard. Charles Boyle is a lot, and he's a lot to love, and I think he knows that about himself, but yet like he fiercely loves it.
So something I love about Charles is I love his arc throughout the course of the show. He starts off kind of as a weak character, and he grows into being like such a strong support for his friends. And, they always make fun of him as being like overly passionate and like kind of too into his friends' lives. But I just love the way that he's such a support for Jake and Amy and Rosa especially. And he also kind of debunks that whole idea of like the alpha male and the beta male, which I think is total BS, by the way. I think there's a lot about Charles that is like a lot like Christ and is authentically manly in the way that he serves other people, in the way that he's kind of meek, and in his passionate support of his friends. I think there's not that he doesn't have ways to grow, and not that he isn't like too passive in some situations and needs to grow to be more active, but I think he really is in a lot of ways very, very holy and very saintly in the way that he loves his friends and the people that he loves taking care of, especially as he becomes a husband and a father. I really just see him growing into being a much more mature, whole person. So yeah, I love Charles. He's awesome. And I think as Catholics, we have a much more robust understanding of what authentic masculinity looks like. If you're more interested in that topic of authentic masculinity, we have a show here on Awaken Catholic called The Men's Show. And I think our first episode, I'm on that as well. And we talk about this idea of what it means to authentically be a man and a man like Christ. So anyway, go listen to that if you're interested more in that concept. So unfortunately, our conversation with Katie got cut a little bit short, but Katie, I loved having you here on this episode, and thank you for talking about a Brooklyn Nine-Nine. You can find Katie at katieprejean.com. I'll put it in the show notes, and she's on Twitter, Instagram, all the things, YouTube, and you can listen to her radio show on Sirius XM. She does a great job. Listen to her podcast, Ave Explorers, and Katie, we love you. We love all the things that you are doing. You are working for the kingdom and touching lives and touching hearts. So thank you for all that you do. My name is Mike Tenney. You can find me at www.miketenneymusic.com, on social media at PK Mikey T, and also in the Awaken app. Oh, and before I forget, I always like to close with a prayer reflecting on the themes of the episode. So wherever you are, take a moment to pause. You can close your eyes unless you're driving. Just take a moment to quiet yourself within, and let's place ourselves in the Lord's presence. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Good and gracious God, we thank you for your passionate friendship for us. We thank you for the ways that you have placed friends in our lives. And we ask that you would help us through the many struggles and trials of our lives, the times that we doubt ourselves, the dysfunctions in our family or in our own hearts, Lord. We place those in your hands, and we entrust them to you. In a special way, Lord, we lift up those who struggle with their friendships, who struggle with their relationships, for those married couples who are struggling with infertility, for those struggling with parenthood and whether they are a good parent and struggling to love their children well. Lord, we place all these people in your hands, and we ask that you would send your Spirit into our hearts and help us to be the saints that you are calling us to be. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Thank you, listeners and viewers. We love you, and we will see you next time.